Okay, I'm here. Wow. Sorry.
I'll throw together a speech drop real quick. There we go. The link and code should be in chat now. Before we get started, Craig, you've judged me before. James, I don't think I've ever had you as a judge. Can I ask you just like one question? Is that cool? You are muted right now, just in case you didn't recognize that. Okay.
Yes, you can ask me a question.
All right. How do you feel about 1AR impact turns? Like, do you feel, will you automatically reject them as like new arguments? I guess is my big question.
Like your impact turn a disad or something?
Yeah, just straight turn a disad on impacts.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, cool. I just wanted to make sure. Some people don't like it, so.
No, that seems fine.
Is it okay if I ask a couple questions too?
Yeah.
So, Craig, I know that do you need proven abuse on T in round robin?
First tournament, I'm more open to a potential abuse argument. It's still not the best avenue, but like I'll vote on it this tournament.
Perfect. Okay, and the same is true, James. How do you feel about topicality? Do you default to competing interps and reasonability, or?
Yeah, I'd say first, maybe I feel a little bit different if it's just like straight up topicality versus like effects topicality or extra topicality. So if you're just like the app is not topical, period, then I'm going to mostly just look at, competing interpretations, evaluate the standards debate, who has a better definition, does the app meet it? And if that meet it, then at that point, I don't really care too much about abuse. If we're looking at something like effects or extra topicality, then I might be more interested and persuaded by arguments that like there's no abuse here, or the step they take is not important or doesn't really cause any problems. I don't need to see in-round abuse. I think a good potential abuse story is fine if it's clear about like how the app could have been used in an abusive manner. Perhaps they maybe chose not to do it in this round, but as I said, I don't think I need to see abuse on most topics.
Okay, great.
All right. If we don't have anything else stopping us, are we all ready to get started?
Just one sec.
Yep, no big deal. I got it uploaded.
Yeah, just give me a sec to get all my windows set up.
Yeah, no big deal. I'll grab a drink, then. All right, is anybody not ready?
I think I'm ready now.
All right, then let's begin. The contention is blood colonialism. The Immigration and Nationalization Act allows for the free passage of indigenous people across the U.S.-Canada border, but only if they have at least 50% blood quantum, which renders the entire statute ineffective. Fidel in 17. In 1952, the INA was amended to include a blood quantum requirement at least 50% to qualify for free passage. This made eligibility dependent on racial lineage rather than affiliation with a tribe, tribal membership, and individual self-identification recognition of the community are insufficient to cross the border. Conversely, an individual could lack all of those would still qualify for free passage in light of her blood lineage. And thus, the plan: the United States federal government should implement immigration reform that removes the 50% blood quantum requirement from Section 289 of the Immigration and Naturalization Act, and eliminating the blood quantum requirement is feasible and allows for new forms of tribal determination. Through-hand in 9. For those who support the free passage rights of Indian, how might that problem be avoided? One possibility might be for Congress to revise the free passage statute and eliminate the blood quantum requirement, a different definition of whether racial that problem might be avoided by shifting from blood quantum. And blood quantum functions as a critical tool for the colonial nation state that allows imperialism to permeate the mind, increasing the violent impacts of colonialism. Only an active rejection of blood quantum in discursive and political spaces can reintegrate and revitalize indigenous communities towards self-determination. Ferguson in 5. Colonialism and racial hegemony create tribal identity crisis, race alienates individuals from tribes while simultaneously enabling racial oppression of colonization, distract native people away from collective cultural survival by forcing attention to immediate survival, losing sight of tribal identities. The resolution of crisis depends on the assertion of indigenous tribal identities that oppose and transcend prejudice the reach of imperialism into our heads. There is also a great need for those of us who are not considered members, along with those who are against the colonialist process like racialization, develop a critical understanding of how race and blood quantum are part of an ongoing imperialist desire to retain hegemonic control. Our failure to examine as evidence is too convenient to refuse responsibility by saying, well, I'm not a tribal member, so I cannot do anything about it. Perpetuation of racism is one of the things that enables nasty racist oppression to continue under the guise of naturalness, colonized and falsified stories become universal truths, cartoon characters, distorts experiences, and confounds those of self-determination, use phenotypical features such as identities to remove the barrier from time and space. Those are the ultimate elements of the humanization process and cultural genocide. Fundamental and remedy of the processes of reintegration, remembrance, and revitalization of indigenous communities only attainable through genuine self-determination. And we will isolate 3 specific impacts. First is statistical genocide. Federally imposed blood quantum requirements are a form of settler colonialism that rely on the genocidal logics of elimination. Jackson in 20. Genocide and settler colonialism work on the logic of elimination by death, forced displacement, or assimilation in order to open up lands for new settlements. Socio-historical processes by which racial identities are created, lived out, and transformed are destroyed without indigenous people measured by blood quantum. The explicit federals use the blood quantum to liquidate tribal lands and eliminate responsibility to tribes. Indian would eventually become indistinguishable. Thus, blood quantum was a critical tool of settler colonialism. Indigenous people need to disappear in order to open up lands and resources for whites. And the second is the state of exception. Blood politics accelerates the racialization of indigeneity by subjecting native identities to the pseudoscience of Western thought. This serves to create arbitrary forms of exclusion between too native to be white and not native enough that confound the path to realizing traditional forms of determination, creating the logical foundation for racial genocide. Kiel in 17. To understand the blood quantum, one must ask why blood carries a symbolic value and affect by visually striking inside and outside the body, both routinely and dramatic circumstances associated with life or life cessation. Blood can consecrate and purify, can also be profane and polluted, define community and the police the words thereof. The coupling of blood nation is by no means natural. Blood carries social meaning as a medium whose ancient Western thought, pure Christian blood emerges from anxiety about the containing effects of Jewish and Muslim blood. The blood quantum is a product of colonial pseudoscience that joined ideas about biological substance of the Victorian typology. Social evolution, racialization was a mechanism that could accelerate the disappearance of indigenous people. Blood quantum figures the scheme of authenticity that is policed by legal institutions. Blood quantum undermines the authority of tribes who grant citizenship to individuals regardless of ancestry. What's a fluid open and a concept of being native became less flexible, speaking reliance on divided by blood, reliance on blood quantum that results in arbitrary forms of exclusion. Blood quantum is doing exactly what is intended to reinforce binaries. And third is immigrant violence. The pillars of racialization on which blood quantum is built create the conditions for violence against all other immigrant populations, where in the West is an always already perfect society meant to cleanse the impurities that originate in the populations they are receiving. The affirmative is a crucial first step in addressing the violence of the immigration system writ large. Cordaweg in 17. Processes of racialization are a work in policy and discourse that see immigrant cultures threatening these linked understandings of religion, gender practices to group along categorization on the basis of ground in the transitive sense, example, blood. The racialization enabled exclusion from social, political, and economic forces, institution practices that shape interpersonal interactions, institutional habit, and structural relations, discussing the inability of immigrants to fully participate in society. Racialization homogenize those who cross the territorial border, always having just arrived, obscures differences between those who settle, have settled, and those who are moving through it. It fails to acknowledge many liberal immigrants are actually second and third generation. These prevent the analysis of differences. Western modernity renders liberation as something already achieved by majority society. Criminality, anti-Semitism, violence against women, all becoming immigrant problems. And extinction framing is a far-fetched privilege and silly abstraction that normalizes violence experienced by indigenous bodies. Only that genocide is the real extinction. Mitchell in 17. Extinction has become an emblem of Western fears about the end of their world. Climate change, asteroid destroying, nuclear destruction. Extinction has become an empty superlative and abstract form of unthinkability. Exposure to the fear of extinction contributes to the formation of Western subjects. Extinction is not quite real for Western subjects. A fantasy and negation that evokes thrill, melancholy, anger, and existential purpose. Extinction is not a metaphor. The very real expression of violence that systematically destroys particular beings. Settler cultures use the violence of metaphorical abstraction to excuse themselves from decolonization. Extinction is an expression of colonial violence that needs to be addressed through direct decolonization, including the dismantling of settler colonial structures. Extinction is embodiment of particular patterns of structural violence that disproportionately affect specific racialized groups. Extinction is systematically inflicted in order to create space for aggressors, including settler states, to simultaneously enact a genocide against indigenous peoples and their non-human relatives. The genocides of indigenous people continue to apace in contemporary settler states, transformed into multiple manifestation, biosecurity, police, biological boundary security is a powerful weapon for precluding flourishing of indigenous people. The extinction is defined by the breaking of relations, the systematic destruction of the conditions of plurality of nature, nurture co-flourishing world. Extinction is not a metaphor for genocide or other forms of large-scale violence. It is a larger manifestation of genocide, making the genocidal logics of the drive extinction involves several more moves to innocence. Treating extinction something short of genocide entrenches Eurocentric understanding of personhood. The entrenchment of this dichotomy also enables the logic of dehumanization. Racialized people are more likely to suffer from the effects of distinction. The violence that drives extinction extended and accuracy beyond the category of Homo sapiens. The threats to settler society. Extinction is not a metaphor. In many cases, it is quite literally genocide enacted against indigenous people and their other than human relations. And the affirmative advocacy for tribal determination is the only way for meaningful change to be made. One-size-fits-all policies inevitably fail. Keelan 17. Blood quantum is so thoroughly permeated the ideas of right and citizenship that even the most common alternative adheres to the same logic. Broadening citizenship requirements beyond blood quantum would set for reversing the attrition of indigenous nations. Native nations must either racialize or risk losing recognition. This double bind leads indigenous communities to exemplify authenticity, not if they're making the high stakes associated with blood quantum makes it impossible or makes it a problem that cannot be approached with a one-size-fits-all solution. It is for each tribal community to navigate. Stripping Native people of their land and epistemologies has been a goal of assimilation. The people need not be biologically homogenous. People can become a nation when it exercises self-determination. I'm now open for cross-ex.
Okay, ready?
Yes.
What does the AF do?
The AF removes the 50% blood quantum restriction from Section 289 of the Immigration and Naturalization Act that prevents, or the Immigration and Nationality Act that prevents indigenous folks born in Canada from crossing the border freely. So people who are part of federally recognized tribes who are born in Canada, have Canadian residency, can freely pass the border now if they have at least 50% blood quantum. If they can prove they are 50% Native, we remove that restriction and just say that people who are politically affiliated with a tribe can pass freely and immigrate to the United States to get LPR.
Okay. Okay. So the only immigration that you remove statutory restrictions on is a small group of indigenous tribes from Canada.
I would argue that the only reason they're small is because blood quantum exists. And secondly, there are a couple 100,000 individuals that the plan affects.
A couple 100,000.
Yeah, in Canada that are part of federally recognized tribes that don't have 50% blood quantum.
Okay, how does the plan get implemented?
The normal means, they remove the statutory restriction in Section 289.
Who does?
Probably Congress. The president signs it.
The president will sign this.
Yeah, fiat. It says that the president would pass the.
But it doesn't say that the president will enforce it, though, right? Like fiat doesn't work like that. I guess how do you make sure the plan happens? I guess is the question I'm asking.
We would argue one. We would say fiat solves circumvention, that the implementation of the plan obviously changes the way people enforce these requirements, so that they allow all indigenous people to pass as long as they can prove tribal membership. Secondly, we would argue that just the USFG removing its last, a concrete example of blood quantum in its legislation is a good thing too, because it changes how we evaluate racialization and what we decide what is and is not indigenous.
Okay. Okay. How does our perception of indigenous change after the affirmative is implemented?
After the affirmative is implemented, we remove the blood quantum requirement and leave it up to tribes to determine who is and is not a part of their tribes, right?
But this is only for Canada, right?
Well, the INA is the last explicit use of blood quantum in federal statutes.
So is it only for Canada or is it for other countries too?
Well, it's the USFG. The USFG recognizes Canadian people as not indigenous if they don't have 50% blood quantum through this statute.
Do you do anything about the indigenous people in Latin America? Is I guess my question.
No, they aren't included in the J Treaty, but we do change the way that the United States evaluates indigenous membership. We devolve it back to the tribes, so tribes get to decide instead of USFG in enforcing rules.
Okay. I'll take 1 minute. All right, 1 minute taken. Drop it in. Sorry, one sec. Here we go. It's 5 off in case.
Just give me 1 sec to get the doc up and
Of course.
my flow ready.
Yeah, you're fine, Craig. I see you. Just let me know.
Okay, I am ready. All right, whenever you're good.
And then I'm just waiting on Craig to make sure he's good. Good? Perfect. I'm going to minimize this so I can only see one of you excellent people, or myself, I guess, if it's not going to change. Okay. The first office topicality immigration reform requires multiple laws to increase access to lawful permanent residence and legality. In 13, gridlock assault immigration reform and enforcement of all legal immigration admission numbers. The key is coordinating various proposals to more cohesive set of laws. Acknowledge the need for improvement in legal that provide a solution allowing transition lawful permanent residents. They violate. They only allow that they reduce the blood quantum and quality restriction on the INA, which means that they only have indigenous people, and it's nothing to do with legal permanent residents prefer versus ground core negative arguments and predicate of large shifts in legal immigration in the United States and the interpreter roads. All of our legal immigrants are generous use of Islamic cash and education because we need meaningful discussion of the UNHCR and limits. Interpret applies multiple steps in the process of immigration. There will squirrely one-off acts that only deal with relatively small problems in the immigration system, which is overwhelmed with neg prep and archaeas and key status for meaningful the classroom discussion through the recent vote neg versus rules and competing answers over the answer that's preferable for the same subject by judgment admission proposed by overall will go to T. The plain text specify the mechanism responsible for removing blood quantum. They don't reason prefer versus next draft. The vague plan has been rerun impossible to make an excellent argument and other reasons they have possible. We don't have a frame of how the plan works and stops there. Seven after she run the story in the details of plan drafting passage implementation, no link policy space, the AS and all processes TVs we've been potential these terms consistent deep debates turn case treat the plans last classification as a tool for conservative anti-immigration policy and Pearson 18 drastic cuts in legal immigration exchange or legalizing what's in the author lead to a 50% reduction in legal immigration frequently called merit-based immigration includes no change in the White House. The White House framework includes a long list of immigration reform divisions that are vague, seem to allow possible to appropriate funds and increase capacity of process people to really do without detailing the reforms about security into the framework provides few details on the intent changes daily, refers to an act and hire to critically personnel and then the proposal refers in the class and in terms of so clear definition appears to refer to a series of policy practice demand exchange and fashion U.S. on our population. The administration knows how recent members of the White House opposes the best of the legal immigration system. Then the wish list would greater enforcement and reduced protection would represent the upside of deal vehicle to an execute hardly face the guys with bill for dreams, fairness, education, ability, pedagogical intent, debates, expand our critical thinking, offer a balance around to the value. You should vote for the debater whose interpretation meets that goal. Drop the debate so long conclusion because your strategy bad for debate. I can't adequately answer it. Go to the dissent. Biden is favored to win 2020 now from COVID with the racial tie in the shell in 20. The political insertion in Joe Biden's favor and the widespread coronavirus had been trying to the U.S. control the minds of Americans. Surprisingly, in the re-election die taking a hit 3 months from now. So determining American politics for some certain time, President has to know the number outlook of exponential movement by direction. The majority of Americans oppose favorable immigration policy during COVID-19 is the issue that's also in 20. Trump's banning on immigration intensified the U.S. to speed over idea. President Democrats the different choices order in terms of reduce unemployment from COVID and surely political ability reform. So many work with so many Americans are independent Democrats are caught between those who favor expansive immigration and American voters 65% supported pausing immigration because of COVID. Independents, non-whites, even Democrats and Biden. Roosevelt given an issue. He knows today given some attack a week on immigration. If they repeal Trump's order, they risk voter backlash. Immigration will even work potentials of re-election. Ensures nuclear and climate-based fixation, arm race proliferation, rhetorical threats, alliances are doomed. Star. In 1920 election, the course guarantees arm race and accentuated nuclear war. World leaders hope that Trump's developing a state global non-proliferation prospect of nuclear war arms is very real. Where U.S. Russia ramp up the wars and trench changes. The effects of climate change, people they friends about it. We cannot focus on walking a parallel suit to go to the dissent. Continue state authority on immigration, essential checking what Trump's wall plan decks. That's back in 18. Back on the executive action, demonstrated official policy to make policy making to executive branch and state divisions and the will political resources change the president and state begin to resist scenarios of the immigration admissions in the make. Shift nation being executive action and flying back on the state level and the policy comment constraint his ability. Trump prepares an constructing physical wall against brother and a miss. The policy consulted the dynamic executive president and state counter emergence challenge with authority. These states were supported following Trump's executive orders then with federal lawsuits and they resulted in injunctions in southern border wall decimates biodiversity extinction ripple in 18. A single species of supreme center principle life, the removal and non-renewable effect on humans, and we lost compounds of biodiversity that thousands face direct consequences with the biodiversity of our future and the versus century multinational sections of the wall, reducing connectivity to reduce the century multinational conservation efforts in Mexico Bay and sort of the 6 equal regions to support considerable diversity construction, destroy and kill those farmers, habitats, and soil, and changes wildlife behavior, evaluating current risk of complete removal, go to the CP. The 50 states, United States, and all other territories should remove the restrictions on INA for blood content 50%. That's it. It's obviously half a better the state-led immigration system promotes better policy and undermines corporatism in the U.S. It's Project 19. Prior to the late 800s, state the bulk of immigration pressure the nation under limited federal government outside the United States can benefit from the immigration system relies on states to states. Attack workers to be beneficial economics competition with more better state policy about evolving immigration authority by cities and corporations have less pressure on federal authority to ensure that we need to met with power spread across states. More checks on corporatism will be created in CB fuel state-led movements to end corporatism. America prevents climate extinction and dismantles capital influence. Current 17 does conserve the environment growth and means important to understand the times of production, especially true for the Trump and corporatism experience. Greater freedom, community rights emerge in the direct opposition. Trump fundamentally upon landscape of environmental policy making their potential expansion to corporate influencers and urges of new legal framework in opposition to delegitimize and collusion rights have been fundamentally organized way to do and over the demonstrates the need for the practice capable of disrupting government corporate control over the policy and the predatory interests of the corporations in Pennsylvania, Washington, New Mexico expose the violence of corporatism, partners, communities exploiters, so often bottom up create a new system of legalism capable of undermining corporate sovereignty and capitalism causes extinction and regards all oppression. Robinson at 16. At least managed for more social violence and equality and opportunities for capital, global social polarization and inequality is unprecedented channeled towards single communities. 21st century hinges on the manipulation of social anxieties at the time of acute capitalism and climate change, the nitrogen cycle and diversity losses, sedimenting oceans, undermining conditions for life in capitalism. Here's our small systems such control and operative repression brought in the panel surveillance and control and glamorizing more violence and training spectacle and neo-fascism and new fascist culture emerging in militarism, masculinization, and racist mobilization, swatch also exploiting immigrant communities. 21st century savior, prison labor populations are at risk of genocide. Systemic critique must strive to influence our survival may depend on a good case. Through executive order, Trump reshaped immigration policy with layers of new regulations pierceable through 20. Trump reforms systems moving ways via executive order to increase enforcement and decrease legal immigration. COVID-19 turbocharged efforts that rapid fire pace more than 400 policy changes on immigration carried along, and unlike the future industry will have the resource to do all the change requests about the plenty of series of policies that favor immigration. Trump have lasting effect in the administration of the bureaucratic mandate in country number of non-citizens in the United States started decline due to increase in closing greater outflows and in the application increased by 17% and then temporary visas fell. The same refugee emission dropped the lowest level since 1980 in the plan provides the statutory mechanism trying to enforce harsh immigration policy. Reinterpret the plan to whatever he wants there in 20. Trump's promise for foreign illegal immigration is horrible. Shut down the asylum and Southern also proved evading Congress passed legislation to make it harder to legally immigrate, unilaterally imposing wall tax, temporarily blocking visas, including H-1B visas, scholarship, and business minor Republicans of blood anti-immigration presidents have broad legal authority over immigration. Congress should be nation laws of president and unilaterally reinterpret those laws in the discretion of Senate priorities for enforcement courts historically deferred to the President. Trump along the same mechanism with the agenda and DHS and ICE use budgetary tricks to undermine the plan anyway. That's Joel. 19. The Trump administration used budgetary tricks to deportation undermine Congress will certainly unfettered authority to transfer between accounts in order to grow with the bloated immigration defense center. Trump reaffirmed his threat and take money away from other parts of the government to build as well, even as the House and Senate are for the $270,000 to TPS holders and the dedicated recipients right now in limbo and suggestions in negotiation and legislation that contains real border improvement at the codifying of the administration anti-immigrant policies. Also, you do nothing for the Latin American indigenous community, which means you probably can't solve any of the advantages.
Ready for cross-ex?
Yeah.
All right, starting now. The first topicality violation. What is the topical version of the AF?
Do way more than blood quantum would be the argument. So like completely remove statutory restrictions from the INA.
Where does the Giovanoli evidence actually define immigration reform?
It talks about immigration reform in the context of legal immigration, which is why it's so good. So maybe it doesn't say immigration reform is X, but it
just says that there's immigration reform in Congress.
I'm trying to tell you what it says. So immigration reform means that it's an adjustment to overall legal immigration admission numbers. And so it says the way to do that. And it says the way to do that. I'm trying to tell you. And so if you do that, it also needs to be a coordination of various laws that make sure that admission numbers net increase. A coordination of various laws. And those statutory restrictions need to be like, it's basically like a substantial argument with legal immigration and immigration reform.
So the resolution says that we have to remove statutory restrictions. This interpretation says we have to add them as well. How do we meet any interpretation under your interpretation of the topic without being extra?
Yeah, it's a cohesive set of laws. Those laws can also remove laws that exist, right? So
Okay.
the law, yeah, exactly. So it would still be a reduction in statutory restrictions. It would just be that reduction through laws.
Okay. The vagueness argument. What more
Yeah.
do we have to specify to meet the interpretation?
How
We
your
said
plan
Congress
works.
removes the specific statute in the INA.
It's an argument about enforcement, right? You told me that, okay, Congress removes it and then Trump just signs it off. What does that
Yeah.
mean for enforcement? The vagueness
You didn't
argument is about
ask.
yes, I did. I said, how does the plan
Okay.
happen? You just said, oh, Congress does it, president signs it. Why would President Trump ever want something like this? It makes no sense. You
We would
have to
argue
specify
fiat's
how
good.
enforcement works.
Let's go to the 2020 dissent. How does
Yeah.
your uniqueness evidence from August 3rd account for RBG's death?
I'll throw up. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've got that. Don't worry.
All right.
Like
So
if I go for
how
2020, you will
if
see.
Americans oppose immigration policy, how
Yeah.
does Trump passing the AF make them not vote for him or make them
It's
vote for him?
perceived as a dim win. The card is really good on that question. It says that Trump has rolled back immigration policies now. It presents Democrats with a difficult choice. So if Congress were to pass, it would still look like a dim win. It would be 100% perceived as a dim win.
All right. The
Yeah.
counter plan. How do the 50 states remove lines of the INA?
You keep talking about this beautiful thing called fiat. We'll do the same thing.
Where does the RIA 19 evidence say that the states have the authority to change federal legislation?
They enforce their own borders, which means that they can basically nullify and call the NIA void.
So
just let indigenous
the
communities
blood
come in.
quantum requirement remains in the INA. The state just refused to enforce it.
No, we would say that it removes that restriction on the INA under the state. So the border enforcement would just not consider blood quantum.
All right. I'll take 4 minutes of prep. Probably not all of it, but most of it starting now. Stop prep, 30 seconds left. Getting it uploaded now. That's the wrong speech drop, sorry. Oh, also I had 28 seconds left. I don't know if I said that or not, but
You're good.
sorry, getting situated here.
I'm ready for an order whenever you are. I don't think he heard me.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. I just realized your headphones were off.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I'm ready for the order whenever you're ready and situated.
Yeah, sorry, I have so many cables going around here that it's hard.
I'm like growing a baby Borg in here. Yeah, I get it.
It's going to be case. It's just the one page. If you float them different, it's going to be the advantage and then framing. Then it's going to be the T immigration reform, the vagueness arguments, the state's counterplan, the 2020 disad, and then the state backlash federalism disad.
Cool. I am ready.
All right. Free passage rights exist in the INA for all indigenous folks on the U.S.-Canada border who retain at least a 50% blood quantum. This makes the exception ineffective by excluding some with strong tribal ties and including others that have no relation to their lineage. Vote AF to remove this requirement and shift to new forms of tribal determination. Then USFG rejecting blood quantum has three unique impacts. The first is statistical genocide. Blood quantum as a means of membership guarantees that as tribal members have children with non-native peoples, that tribal members and cultures and dwindle down to nothingness. That's Jackson. Second is the state of exception. Blood quantum creates a violent state between two native to get benefits of being white but not native enough to belong to a tribe. Blood works as a way for Western science to explain how black and brown bodies contaminate pure white blood. That's Keel. And third is broader immigrant violence. The systems of racialization that the idea of blood reproduces is the basis for violence against all their immigrant populations. It allows the U.S. to draw the line between the good U.S. citizen and the harmful immigrant because of something fundamentally different in their genetics. That allows all problems to be seen as immigrant problems instead of realizing the violence perpetuated by the state and by modern capitalism. And they say the group their first two arguments about circumvention. We say durable fiat solves this argument. They have to enforce the AF. But secondly, the immigrants don't have to get in the country for us to be able to solve. Our impacts are based in removing the blood quantum at the federal level. That's the Keel card, the Jackson card, and the third impact card from above. It's just a matter of removing federal recognition of blood quantum. But and then the next argument they say is that the DHS budget to undermine that no budget necessary. All they have to do is show that their proof of indigeneity, their proof of tribal membership at the border, which was in cross-sex of the 1AC. That means they don't need money for this. They say we don't do anything for Latin American. We say that ending blood quantum probably helps all tribes in the United States altogether. And they dropped the framing question. Extend Mitchell. You should reject extinction level impacts. They are used by imperialist governments to abstract violence committed against native folks. Extinction, as they posited, is never going to happen. It is only a parallelistic voyeurism of the extinction experienced by colonized bodies every day in the form of genocide. You should reject all of their big impacts. Go to T, immigration reform. Counterinterpretation. Immigration reform just needs to affect immigration legislations, including the INA, Alien 13. Immigration reform in the United States as a result of restrictions imposed layer by layer. The Immigration Nationality Act laid the groundwork for procedures still used today, including immigration policy has been modified drastically by the Immigrant Nationality Act of 1990 and again by the Homeland Security Act of 2002. And we affect the Immigration and Nationalization Act, which is a broad policy. Means we meet their interpretation and prefer our interpretation. One, precision. We actually define it in our piece of evidence. They just talk about a bill currently in Congress. Second is AF ground. We allow for multiple different affirmatives that don't have to do like everything, the negative will always beat their interpretation through a strategic plan inclusive counterplan. Third, we establish a bright line. They don't have any argument about what is cohesive and what is comprehensive versus just regular old immigration reform. And the INA checks all their predictability arguments. And you should default to reasonability. That's the best way. Competing interpretations causes a race to the bottom and substance crowd. And reading topicality shell straight turns their fairness and education impacts. Reject the team. We'll read one disad, the one drop rule disad. Extend Keel. Their topicality argument is just like the one drop rule. We're including even one affirmative that doesn't meet their ideas of what a topical half should be, makes the entire topic unredeemable. These are the same logic that allow for the racialized violence of exclusion that are forced upon indigenous folks. You should reject the team. Go to vagueness. Lol, we meet this argument. We told you the line of the INA and that Congress does it. We also said that enforcement is when they show that they show tribal citizenship at the border. That was the cross-ex. And their interpretation causes overspecification. That's bad. It increases AF abuse by doing things like reading 4 plan planks to spike out of counterplans and disads and counterinterpretation. We just have to specify the statute we remove and the actor that removes it. And so on states, permutation do both. Simultaneous state action insulates Trump from criticism, or the counterplan also links to the net benefit because it gets perceived as Trump allowing for immigrant influx. And they can't change the INA. No solvency. And there's no solvency for the parts about blood colonialism that the AF goes for. And federal action is necessary. Most effective ways to establish immigration policy. Singer and Weiner in 14. To craft effective policies, communities must understand that direct immigrants whatever the configuration of the state and municipal immigrant attention to strategy, they're not subject to federal legislation, action to federal, not state, or local policy that controls laws that allow immigrants to enter the country to live and work. And states' counterplans are bad. Reject the counterplan. First is fairness. Ruins staff ground because it moots the majority of the AF, and simultaneous action by 50 actors isn't supported by scholarship. Second is logical decision making. Undermines advocacy skills and competing equity because no policymaker is in a position to choose the counterplan over the plan. And vote AF for strategic damage and deterrence. And federal incentives counterplan solves all their standards about why the state's counterplan is good. And artificial competition for disadvantages is bad. They just read this like capitalist movement argument and say that the counterplan is necessarily key to do that. It kills predictability. It's impossible for the affirmative to be able to predict all of the net benefits that can come from passing the counterplan. You should reject the team. Go to the 2020 disad. It's non-unique. Biden is expanding his lead nationally. Silver 924. On Wednesday, Biden was excellent result in national polls, including 10-point high quality national polls from Quinnipiac University and Marquette Law School, bringing his main margin in the national polling average up to 70.3 percentage points. And it's non-unique. Trump outwardly supports indigenous rights in his past multiple years in the last year. Proves no link. String path 1227. Trump announced that he signed 3 bills to support tribal compensation to the Spoken Tribe, reauthorization for funding in native language programs and federal recognition of little shell tribes, 2 ship on Indians in recent months. The president has acted on several issues that affect the Native American community. We remain committed to preserving and protecting Native American cultures, languages, and history. The president said in a statement. Also, they don't have any unique impact to Trump 2020. Trump should have already caused the nuclear buildup that they talk about in the Star 19 card. Also, the Star 19's democracy impacts are non-unique. Death of RBG means that democracy is probably fucked for the long-term via the Supreme Court. And no link. Their immigration links do not assume the Canadian border. It's not politically controversial. Daily in 13. The legal situation of indigenous groups along the U.S.-Canada border differs from those along U.S.-Mexico. U.S.-Canada border is a milder political climate than the highly patrolled atmosphere of the U.S.-Mexico border. Go to states backlash. COVID dumps federalism in the United States abroad and takes out their uniqueness and modeling claims. Charmin 5.3. Before the virus unbalanced growth was already restraining federal structure, the current crisis threatens to open new disagreements to be all wealthier, more globalized parts of the federal system that have been hit hardest and earliest by the pandemic. All that the federal structure really is fiscal transfer of countries that are unable to agree on how much to send. There is facing a level of fiscal paralysis of populist and authoritarianism sprung up. Mark that piece of evidence and sprung up. And no link. We don't do anything that oversteps state rights. They don't have to provide services to individuals over J Treaty, and their link evidence is in the context of asylees and refugees. And the group, the impacts, the biodiversity, and the Trump 2020 impacts. These are an example of the settler move to innocence that says that they can save all people, that allows for the violence against indigenous folk. Your nuclear war is endemic of a nuclear war that's already happening, where indigenous folks have to mine the uranium to put into the bombs. It's a non-unique impact.
Sorry, I was muted. So the order is going to be the first disad, T1, T2, the CP, the AF, and then 2020 at the bottom. And let me upload real quick.
After you upload, just give me the order again.
Of course, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, so the order is FISM at the very top, so disad 2, T, and then vagueness, and then states, the AF, and then 2020 at the bottom. And then I can upload, sorry, I'm having weird issues with the doc. I just saw Craig's message. Sorry. I saved it under NC again, so it'll come up as NC. Says it's uploading, but it's been uploading for a minute.
I just got it. Let me download it and open it first, please.
Yeah, of course. Just also double check if the NR is in there. I want to make sure that it's saved and everything.
Yeah, the NR stuff's on the top.
Cool. And then if everyone could just give me an okay, we'll get this going. I can only see one person at a time, so I might actually.
I'm good.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll get started. We'll start on the second disad. The only offense on this disad is about the impact and extinction framing. So we're going to answer that back on the 2020 disad, but you can also make sure that it's an independent voter for the state CP solves better because there's still a risk of that happening. Go to the topicality argument. Your only offense on this is that you should reject the team because of the articulation about fairness for indigenous rights. But I say that this is key for pre-fiat fairness in voter and education for the affirmative and negative. It's absolutely critical that I contest your resolutional analysis, but also I'm not going to believe that Craig or James is going to vote on this. So it's not really that important. Go to topicality. The vagueness show. You completely concede the card about why vague plans are bad because they completely deck solvency. It makes your articulation that Trump would hijack the plan and make sure that there are still anti-immigrant things imposed within the plan. This is going to be devastating. If you concede this impact, it means that you don't get your third impact. You talk a lot about immigrants being treated better. If that's true, then Trump just hijacks the plan and makes sure the federal government still demonizes indigenous rights and immigrants now. That is absolutely critical. Goes 100% conceded from the affirmative. An independent reason to prefer the state's counterplan to the federal government. You can go to the state's counterplan now. We'll start on the theory argument, counter-interpretation negative. You get 150 states counterplan with the topic specific out of the sovereignty evidence. I mean, it solves your offense evidence not only specific to state sovereignty, but debunks strong federal action on immigration, which means that you should have prefer versus counter-interpretation that negates the field state action in Chicago 19. The ground is good and state debates are robust and increasingly key to broader immigration. Over 458 academic journals in the New West all reference immigration federalism. Over 3 decades, immigration federalism literature focus on the questions of common federalism scholarship and creates generally immigration often sideline the broader analysis and how increasingly playing a role in the case study. And it's predictable. Literally thousands of highly debated immigration immigration-related bills at the state level, while signed in 20 to 21st century non-president immigration-related bills and resolutions, state legislature 49 50 states and more than 2,400 immigration laws, thousands more bills and resolutions, policies for scholars and colonists are exploring state-based visas. You can prefer the evidences, the theories of conjecture and structural limits states making places short in the act, not just being able to shade it, states check tiny one off out of the act with the flood of cases. Back answers can't keep up. There's no alternative. Competitive generic shadow without the key generic with the affirmative. You can run new app every round structurally impede the education and clash and snag. Would have to abandon the bedrock of its crap. Also, it's not a voting issue. There's no reason to drop the debate or not deny you. You justified just take the argument since we submitted every time. If you actually believe that state's theory is not good, and also on offense on the you say just logical option, just reject the interpretation of reason to drop the fact. It's an advantage of the fiat going into AR more than a fair trial. If I can narrow on this, they get first and last speech and extra 2 minutes to speak in time and infinite prep. You're gonna not drop the argument though, because we're gonna win on theory with the cards. Overview. This isn't a debate about whether or not the affirmative is a good idea, but whether or not the USFG is best to carry out, extend the first card on the CP here through the lengths of sufficiently or the principle to solve the broad majority of the affirmative. We don't have to match them step by step at the end result of the same. Our 8 courts of the states have historically played a huge role in immigration policy. Recent federal immigration measures have resulted in more state-by-state laws and enforcement anyway. A president and set for the states to carry out the affirmative. Any risk of any net benefits means you prefer the after the CP. We sufficiently resolve the advantage of the affirmative and avoid all of the dissents. Also, you're going to make the articulation on the perm do both. You said that it's somehow going to infiltrate all of the Trump criticism or the CP links, but we have a couple arguments against this. First, it's not necessarily true. All the net benefits are unique to federal government action, which means that you can still prefer the state's counterplan, but also your articulation about the CP linking is absolutely false. There's no federal enforcement whenever the states do the plan, which means that it can't possibly link to things like 2020. Also, you say you can't change the INA. We absolutely can. The CP means that the states can either not enforce at the border, which means that we still get the same impacts from the case, or secondly, we make sure that immigrants actually come into the United States. Your argument on solvency was horrific on this question. You make the articulation that somehow immigrants, even not coming in the United States, it's mostly about rhetoric, but states make sure that they solve completely because they can come in and border enforcement make sure that we neglect things like Trump enforcement, which is net better for indigenous rights. Federal follow-on too. State implementation is key, avoids rollback, reduce more restrictions. The federal government follows on Gerken and Burger 2017. They making the best for instance, the block legislation and challenge from the coordinator that they still have access to more powerful weapons federalism using states, progressive members and shape national further force compromise and promising areas include the environment and consumer protection rollback. These series of regulations remain on the block and states have the compliance of when Trump appeals states and they take advantage of the powerful weapons spillover. They force the ban and encourage compromise and spillover within the politics of the negotiation moderation of New York. Regulates that they children everywhere, say doing the reforming iteration that can direct navigate working through state and states at the agenda and grab headlines, state debate in the way that protests on and progressives. He uses the tool encourage moderation and reshape conservation. This is going to be critical because it means that the affirmative can actually happen after the state's implementation, which means that we still avoid the 2020 net benefit, but we still make sure that there's going to be proper enforcement. That's key because it means that we can solve all of the affirmative avoiding the net benefits. Also, you make the articulation that somehow this, which resolves the Steiner and Wagner and 14 evidence about federal action being key too. Also, you make the articulation that it kills predictability with the net benefit. Neither of the judges are going to vote for that. It's a blippy analytic that actually is not warned out about why it needs to be a voter. And we're going to make the articulation that states are critical for the same reason we read on the state's theory shell. That's true for net benefits too. Go to solvency. Only a couple arguments here about the Pearson Bolter and 20 evidence. You said that the one durable fiat resolves this, but it's not about durable fiat. Instead, it's about whether or not Trump can actually enforce the plan or whether or not immigrants come to the United States. If immigrants don't come to the US, then none of your impacts are true because it means that you don't actually increase the amount of indigenous rights and indigenous immigrants, but also we're going to make the articulation that you don't need to get into the country to access impact card is horrible because states can solve it better, which means that we actually access those impacts. There's no way you get the impacts of indigenous rights don't become better, net better after the plan. That's a horrible argument. Go to 2020. Dims and when led to 2020 robust analysis prove that independent monarchs are turning up on Trump because in the comments handling COVID-19, the path of victory is far narrower than ever defined by background institutional that guarantees America's support restriction on immigration or COVID-19 liberal plans, political statement, democratic establish that dooms their chance in the election. Also, you make the articulation that Biden is standing lead right now, but will answer that the race is closed. Biden is leading voting grants and put it on coordinator on September 24, 2020. Death, Robert G. Executive Fireman, the Battlegrounds, the Barney, and the coronavirus, and the end of the economy, racial justice, focus on how the president went handle the health crisis and restore the economy for the 12 crucial battles and school inside the election has been 13 play still and playing Trump that they blame defend violently the spend in Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin, COVID-19, the economy was a heading straight in Missouri, and Trump's running on immigration and terrorism leading back to coronavirus. This is going to be critical. It means that we resolve all of this. Listen. If the CP resolves most of the affirmative and we get those impacts and we avoid 2020, that is net better for indigenous rights. You're voting negative.
"28 seconds of prep starting now. the order is going to be the theory argument. Yeah, the like OSPEC extension. Then the 2020 disad, the AF, and the state's counterplan. Is anybody not ready?
Sorry, can you say it just one more time?
Yeah, the vagueness argument,
Okay, vagueness first, yeah.
then the 2020 disadvantage, then the blood quantum AF page, and then finally the counterplan.
Vagueness 2020. Blood quantum page. Okay, I think I got that.
Okay, is anybody not ready? All right. First on over to the specification, extend the we meet, or first on the theory, extend the we meet argument. This solves all of their arguments about, we're not vague. They conceded this means it solves all their arguments about Trump decking the plan. Go to 2020 disad. They fucked this debate up really badly here. Extend all of the drop pieces of evidence. We're going to extend the argument that it's non-unique because Trump supports indigenous rights in the status quo. He's passed 5 different laws in the last year. That means that the disadvantage is non-unique should already have swung voters. And extend the daily piece of evidence that the Canada border is not politicized like all other immigration is. That the Canada border specifically seems benign and so it doesn't get influenced by the public. And extend the argument there's no unique impacts to this. There's no unique impact to this that hasn't already happened. They dropped this articulation that we should already see nuclear war. There's no democracy modeling impact, and they drop framing in the 1NC and don't do a sufficient job answering it in the 1NR, which means you should reject this disad on face because it engages in violent utilitarianism that always puts on indigenous rights on the back burner. Their sufficiency framing is an example of this move to innocence Mitchell isolates. I don't need to do a lot of work there for you to reject the disad. If they don't win the disad, you should vote AF on the presumption. Because the counterplan AF have no, because the AF definitely solves at least as well as the counterplan. We'll go for it solves better. The AF page. They try to extend the circumvention argument, but we're going to extend the durable fiat argument. Solves this by implementing the enforcement that it by implementing the enforcement of the plan by creating by allowing individuals into the United States through with whatever amount of blood quantum, as long as they're politically affiliated with a tribe. There's no room for loopholes. Durable fiat should be able to solve that. But secondly, even if immigrants don't get in, we still solve all of our evidence is about federal government rejecting blood quantum in every instance. Though that's what the Ferguson card is all about, as well as the Keel and the Jackson pieces of evidence, which means that even if they don't get into the United States, that's not the point of the AF, which is going to come really important on the states counterplan. On states. First, extend permutation, do both. The only analysis as to why we can is because it links to the disadvantage. I took out the disadvantage above. If you don't think there's risk of the disad, then you should vote out. But secondly, it cannot change the INA. They've conceded that the states have no jurisdiction to actually change the Immigration Nationality Act. It means they cannot remove blood quantum as a statute, which means they cannot solve the statistical genocide impacts nor the state of exception impact, where immigrants are always, where natives are always considered either too native to be white or not native enough to be part of a tribe. This creates psychic and physical violence against immigrants as their blood is seen, as their racialization is seen as a justification for white violence against them. The fact that the state's counterplan can't solve this means that it's an automatic affirmative ballot. That's the Mitchell card. And they say it results in federal follow-on. 1, this card is not specific to the blood to the affirmative. Secondly, this is a new argument in the 2NR. Third, all of their circumvention arguments prove Trump probably won't do the AF, or won't do the AF in the future, means they cannot claim the federal government. Look, at the end of the day, start your decision on the disadvantage. If you don't think there's a risk of a disadvantage because of 3 conceded arguments, then you should vote affirmative on presumption. They are not winning. They have not been able to explain to you how the states actively remove part of the INA, which is where all of our solvency mechanisms come from. It's not about people getting into the US. It's about rejecting blood quantum. I would go back and read the Ferguson card. It's really good on this question. Good debate, Isaac.
Good debate.
Okay. I don't think we have a lot of time before the next round, so I'm going to be really quick, I guess. Are we doing this right? Okay, it's a split decision. I voted for Isaac and James voted for Nicholas. So congratulations to you both, I guess, or like sorry to you both. I don't know, however you want to look at it. I voted that the counter plan probably doesn't solve the entirety of the AF right now, but it probably will later due to the spillover evidence. I don't think that I think that Nicholas, I think both sides are really scattered and not focusing in that much. For Nicholas, I think that really hurts you because there's not a really good articulation of what it is. You're extending a lot of tag words of your impacts on the AF, but not really a lot of the meaning behind it, like the statistical genocide and the state of exception, right? And I don't have a coherent reason as to why these things are super bad if the counter plan can solve for them later by instigating the conversation. So I think that the counter plan probably doesn't, there is a solvency deficit in the near term, but I think in the long term, it has the potential to do more. And so then the arguments on 2020 are a bit defensive alone. So I don't think there's an articulation as to why it's terminal defense. I think you would do a really good job of just being harping on the framing and being this is why this is important, and that this is dropped, and be don't let him, say that oh, I'm going to answer it later. No, it was dropped, right? So that's the only framing. And now let me tell you why these things that the counter plan can't solve for are a thing. Also, I mean, just basic stuff where there's no way that the states are border patrol. They aren't, right? And I think the idea that people are just going to cross the border at non-federal things doesn't make sense. It kind of reinscribes these really bad stereotypes of Native Americans to be oh no, they're just going to walk across the border and things like that because Native Americans don't drive cars, or I don't even know what this is about. So I don't know how the states solve for border patrol, which are federal workers, but we don't get into that debate. But yeah, that's where I'm voting is risk of the DA and that the counter plan eventually is going to solve.
All right. How did you evaluate the permutation debate?
I think the perm links to 2020.
All right. So just I had to better explain why dropped arguments mean the dissad don't function.
Yeah, you have to impact that. Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about the dropped arguments.
So I went for no link because they didn't answer the Canada border articulation. How when that's dropped, how much more work do I need to do on it?
You need to say that somehow that eliminates the entirety of risk, which I don't know why it does. You're just saying well, their card doesn't talk about Canada. It's well, okay, but they still made an arg, right? So why is the risk gone? Okay.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the round obviously comes down to the same things, but I sort of see it in a similar way, but come down on the other side of the coin where I think the solvency deficit to the counter plan is real and is substantial in this case. And I think the plan is able to solve specifically by removing this problematic statute in the INA, which the counter plan doesn't do. And I'll also mention on the counter plan, I don't think the exact text of the counter plan was in the speech doc, but I kind of felt like the counter plan almost morphed into between what it did in the speeches. Because I think when you first read it, you were 50 states do the plan. 50 states repealed this from the INA. And then in Cross-X, Nicholas was well, how do they do that? And you're oh, well, actually, they'll just nullify it by letting people in anyway, which honestly, I kind of felt was just a completely different counter plan than what you originally read. That wasn't really a big issue for me because no one brought it up. But I do think the counter plan kind of just changed what it did throughout the round. But I think the important part is the solvency deficit comes from the fact that the counter plan can't actually repeal this legislation, which is what his plan is saying is problematic, the fact that it exists. And, okay, we can do the perm or whatever. And then so the only answer to the perm is this 2020 dissad. I think there's sufficient mitigation on the dissad in terms of these arguments, the Canada argument. I don't think the Canada argument was great, but it was dropped. There was maybe a few other arguments, and more importantly for me, also the impact framing that was going on throughout the round, that the sort of impacts talked about by the case were the impacts I should be prioritizing. And so I think a major solvency deficit for the counter plan compared to the case or the perm, combined with mitigation on the dissad and the dissad having the second priority impact in my mind, is enough for me to vote for the case/perm being preferable to the counter plan. And on like the vagueness argument, I buy that the we meet that the plan wasn't really vague in the sense that I understood. I mean, it just repeals this piece of legislation. The one random thing I'll add that's not critical to this round is you sort of said after we repeal this legislation, then the status quo becomes, I guess, everyone can get in if the tribe believes they're a member. I guess I'm not an expert on immigration law. I don't know what it says, but I kind of feel like the status quo would just become like no one gets in unless they apply for a visa or something. Maybe I'm just wrong about that.
Okay, so just clarifying that a little bit better.
Yeah, well, I mean, like even like your solvency card in the case did say something like we should repeal the 50% standard and replace it with something else.
All right.
Plan doesn't replace it with something else, it just repeals it. So I feel like if we just repeal it, maybe I'm wrong because I don't know what the rest of that act says or the rest of the statute says. I'm just saying my thought would be if we repeal it, then it would just be like, there's no special exceptions made for Canadian tribal members. They're just treated like everyone else.
All right. Yeah, that
That's
makes sense.
a critical deal. I'm just saying like that was kind of my interpretation of what would happen. Maybe I'm just totally wrong.
Yeah, no, I'll look into that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good debate, Isaac.
Great debate. I'll see you all later.
Let's see.
Cool.